We are back. A's baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And my co-host today, only because Patrick Tracy is on the DL. And to be serious, he suffers quite extensively from back pain and back trouble, and he just hasn't been up for doing the show. And anyone who's ever had back problems, I've had relatives who are pains in the back, who have suffered from it, and friends over the years, and it's horrible. And I'm wishing Patrick comes back and has a speedy recovery. I can't go solo. I brought in baseball maven, expert, history buff, Ian Kahanowitz, fellow podcaster. How are you, sir?
Hey, it's always good to talk about the A's, and, you know, a lot of attention's coming to my show and your network on Genesis. In fact, I got Jason Turbo coming on the show in June, and he wrote a fantastic book on the Charlie Finley years, as you and I spoke last week after the show, and, those swinging A's.
They have a reputation. Patrick and I discussed and have discussed the Charlie Finley era. We are both more, not ignorant, but we know so little about Connie Mack. He gets a bad rep from the standpoint he managed more games than anybody in the history of baseball. He managed for 50 years, but he owned the team. But in those 50 years, he built two wonderful dynasties and had some great Hall of Fame players. How did Connie Mack get started in baseball? And Ian Kahanowitz will answer that question.
You know, as many of you know, and as you know, Ralph, I do have the Ty Cobb in the dead ball era, and Mack even started his career before the dead ball era, which you could say was 1900 to 1919, ending in the scandal with the Black Sox. But Connie Mack, he began in 1886, and he played 10 seasons in the National League. And
he was a catcher, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's see, he was a catcher, almost entirely as a catcher. 11 seasons in the majors and one for the Players League. That was the year that they broke off. I think it was 1890. The Players League was formed, and in the winter of 1889, he jumped to the Buffalo team of the new Players League, which was challenging the National League at the time, and a very big story way before Marvin Miller. We're talking about 70 years before.
Yeah.
This league challenged the National League because there was no American League at the time, and unfortunately it folded after 1 year. But Mack was a light-hitting catcher, but he did have a reputation as being a smart player.
But how does he come to own a baseball team?
Well, he began managing first of all. His last 3 seasons in the National League were he cut his teeth with the Pittsburgh Pirates from 1894 to 1896, and then afterwards he went and he really acted as a full manager. An occasional backup catcher for the minor league Milwaukee Brewers. And we're talking about a salary of about $3,000 a year and 25% of the club's profit back in 1897 to 1900. Now, in 1901, when Mack became manager and treasurer of the Philadelphia A's, he bought into the club. And again, let's think about this. 1901 was the year that the American League first was started. So again, this was a risk, like any other business, because the National League was in the sport for 5 years. This American League, they didn't know if it would fold like the old Players League. That's how he got started with the Philadelphia Athletics.
So he got a piece of the team, but he was a manager before the owner, before he became an owner, which is answers that one age-old question in my mind. Nepotism is one thing, but when you own the team, it's easy to stay on. For the most part, he struggled all through ownership. He built a team, wouldn't be able to keep up financially, and have to start from scratch. And till the end, when I don't think his final years owning the A's in Philadelphia were pleasant. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. The thing is, as an owner, Connie Mack adhered to the kind of ownership style of the day. Baseball was a different game back then. A lot of people, cite Charles Kaminsky as being the cheapest owner in the league, and he didn't even spend a dime to wash their uniforms, the Sox, and so they were called Black Sox because their uniforms were so dirty rather than White Sox. And which led them to go through a scandal because the owners felt that the reserve clause, and I'll define the reserve clause, that owners can make or break a player by either basing their salary upon their play, and the player had no right to even challenge the owner, or not even arbitration, which didn't come later until 1973. So we're like 100 years ahead of ourselves here. The owners had the right to do anything they wanted. And the court case that came down in 1921 said that the baseball is not part of the antitrust laws. And so the reserve clause, which keeps the owners in charge of the club, will remain, and basically baseball is entertainment. It's not part of the labor aspect of the United States. Now, Mack, as an owner, adhered to that level. Now, he had success, like you mentioned, in the early 1909, 1911, 1912, 13. He made the World Series about 4 different times. But after 1914, when the favored Philadelphia Athletics was supposed to beat the Boston Braves, the Miracle Braves won. And after that, his players were getting old, Connie Mack, and he had a fire sale. Now, that A's franchise lingered for about 12 years until the late 1920s. And Mack wouldn't do anything, really, to put, the kinds of pieces together in the puzzle to solve the A's woes. Because, number one, you had World War I, which was changing the dynamics of baseball. People were coming out more. There was more money to be had to spend on games, working hours, and laborers. They now had an average of, say, 10 hours a day instead of working 16 hours a day. So people can go in and watch a baseball game, but Connie Mack did not put, his money into it. And as the first team that I mentioned aged, Mack acquired a core of young players to form his second great team, which featured Mack's famous $100,000 infield of Eddie Collins, Home Run Baker, Jack Barry, and Stuffy McGinnis. But again, all these guys were heroes of the dead ball era, and the Athletics, captained by catcher Ira Thomas, won the 1910, 11, 13, and 14 pennants, beating the Cubs in the World Series in 10, the Giants in 11 and 13. But after 14, bang, he disbanded the team. The team wouldn't rise again until 1927, where now we're starting to get a better sense that the pieces are finally coming together. I'm surprised they didn't run Mac out of Philadelphia, but the 27 A's featured several Hall of Fame players, including, remember this, Ty Cobb, Zach Wheat, former Brooklyn Dodger, Eddie Collins, as well as young stars like Mickey Cochran, Lefty Grove, Al Simmons. And
Al Simmons was a terrific ball player.
And Jimmy Fox.
Yeah.
And don't forget, a year later, they'd get Tris Speaker because of that whole Cobb Speaker affair that no one really understands and knows about. You know, they had to quit as manager players. Speaker.
It was a gambling thing, was it not?
Dutch Leonard was a pitcher who pitched under Cobb and as manager. And what happened was he just didn't like the way he was being treated. And he told Ban Johnson, the American League president, that a gambling scandal happened about 7 years before, in 1926, and it was a game where the Chicago White Sox, that Black Sox in 1919, who would go on to have their own scandal, as we know, in the 1919 World Series, there was another big scandal that year. And
to spite their owner, who was a chief.
Right. So you had Smokey Joe Wood, you had Ty Cobb, and you had Tris Speaker gambling to throw a game that Cleveland would throw a game so that Detroit can finish in second so they could get a bigger share of the pot money. This was taken to Ban Johnson, who tried to keep it from the media. He actually paid Dutch Leonard $20,000 for letters that Ty Cobb, Smokey Joe Wood, and Tris Speaker wrote, but all three of them on the testimony said this was for the ponies. This wasn't for betting on baseball. Now, the case goes to Judge Landis, and Landis makes a huge mistake. Ban Johnson wanted to keep this secretive, and Landis decided to give it to the press, which had a field day. You can go back into the archives like I've done because I'm working on research now for a possible book, and I'll mention the Comfortably Zoned Network in it because of my show Genesis. But Landis made a huge mistake by telling the public that it got so out of hand, so like a three-ring circus, like we're harping back to the days of 6 years ago with the Black Sox, that Landis ordered Dutch Leonard to come and testify against these three guys. He didn't do it, and when he didn't testify, he threw the case out because he wasn't going to hang his two most famous players, Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker, and he told the American League owners, because him and Ban Johnson had a spew of bad blood in the mid-20s due to the 24-25 World Series, this was the final knockout that Landis is like, listen, either he goes or I'm stepping out as commissioner. And the American League had Ban Johnson step down, ruined his career, got sick right after and died a few years later. But this was the third biggest gambling scandal in baseball. Number one, again, the Black Sox. Number two, 60 years later with Pete Rose. But no one has ever spoken about this. There was not even one book written on it, and I got hundreds of articles. I've done my research in preparation to write this book with author Gerald C. Wood. Now, Connie Mack, through all this time, he knew things like this was going on, but the game was changing. Landis was upset in mid-1926 that he had to go back in time and deal with such nonsense before he became commissioner. And so he was kind of a different type mindset by 1926, saying, I really don't want to handle things happening before I came to commissioner. He did crack down on Leo DeRocher in the 1927 season and beyond, up until the time he died, the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was very heavy-handed, Landis. He got along occasionally with Connie Mack. And because of all this stuff going on in the 1920s where Ty Cobb was getting older. Chris Speaker was getting older. You still had the Yankees as a dominant team. Mac was able to get these young players and start the second dynasty by which they won the pennant in 19.
Now, when you say get these players, was like Branch Rickey, did he have a farm system going by then?
No. Would you believe he went into the sandlots himself? He went into the sandlots and local games. He scouted them himself.
Much like one of his predecessors, Charlie Finley.
He did it himself. He would go out there.
Finley did a lot of his scouting to build that A's dynasty as well. I did. You'll know better than I. Was Branch Rickey and the Yankees, were they the only two farm teams, franchises with farm teams?
What year?
In those days.
No. St. Louis had a huge farm system that Branch Rickey created in the mid-'30s when the gasoline house gang, the gas house.
But before that, he originally created the farm system with the St. Louis Browns. Before that, did Branch Rickey. Did anyone else have a farm system in baseball to emulate that at that time?
No, because number one, they couldn't afford a farm system team. Not every team, had the funds or had the networking like the Yankees, Dodgers, and Cardinals did, which is why they were on, top. I think Detroit had a Southern team. Cincinnati would later on have a team in Cuba. And besides Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, they would have. But when the A's moved to Kansas City really didn't have money for a farm team. They were the Yankees farm team at the time. So, But, again, you're dealing with X amount of money coming in from larger markets as opposed to bigger markets, smaller markets. And what you have during this time is the invention of radio. And I have a show you'll be publishing in a few weeks. Plus, you got to publish Walter Johnson because Walter Johnson, I had his grandson, and you had him on a show too. Hank Thomas, I did.
Hank Thomas, a very articulate guy. Oh. What a sweet man, and so modest about his grandfather, the way he describes him. Walter Johnson was just tremendous. He and Christy Mathewson were the two best pitchers in baseball, and Hank is so very low-keyed about it, and it's a great interview. I listened to it the other day, and one of those guys that I'll always remember interviewing myself. This is a cool biz we're in, isn't it? We get to talk to some of the most interesting people on the planet.
Like Isla Borders, who was the first female to play, professional baseball. She was recruited by Bill Veck's son, and she played for the St. Paul Gophers in the mid-'90s. She emailed me yesterday. She said, Ian, I got to postpone our interview because she's flying to L.A., but she gave me the courtesy to call me, and she's going to be on the show. We're going to talk a little women's baseball. And
nice,
she went.
Nice. I hope you refer to my interview with my good friend, Sherry Davis, who was the first woman public address announcer in the history of baseball with the San Francisco Giants. And ironically, Sherry and I were, and this is going back to the 80s, we both tried out for that job. And I tried out, I wanted to be a public address announcer with the Giants. It's like the Peter Principle. That's all I could basically do. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And she got the job. And we got to be friends years later, and I had her on the show a few times.
Hey.
And it's pretty cool.
Well, you run a great network, but getting back to Connie Mack, his managing style, I have to say, very low key. Lefty Grove, I'm going to be having a show on Grove and Lefty O'Doul as well. Grove, as you know, hot-headed, and one day, after a tough defeat in 1932, Grove is in the clubhouse raising hell, just throwing chairs, screaming at people, and menacing lockers. And finally, Mack came out to try to quiet him, and Grove, he wasn't going to have any of it. And he said, "To hell with you, Mack. To hell with you." To which Mack responded quietly as Grove stormed off into the shower. "And to hell with you too, Robert." Mack was a very calm manager, almost like, what's his name on Seattle? Pete Carroll. In football, very low key. It's not the Billy Martin or the Earl Weavers, throwing chairs and kicking dirt and stuff. Mack was a player's manager, and he really was. He was called everything from pop to the tall manager, and he
appeared in his pictures to be very gruff. He's got the suit and the tie on and this and that. It's nice to learn that he did communicate well with his players, and because that's what managing is all about, really. It's just
and for the day, Ralph, he was a new type of manager, the New York Times observed. The old-time leaders, like we'll talk about next week on Giants baseball, like John McGraw, ruled by force, often thrashing players who disobeyed orders on the field or broke club rules off the field. And Miller Huggins had to stop him and Babe again, because, Babe was breaking it. Connie Mack, I will say this, he is one of the kindest and most soft-spoken men. He always insisted that he could get better results by kindness. He never humiliated a player by public criticism. No one ever heard him scold a man in the most trying times, like I mentioned with Lefty Grove. He was known as a tactician, the tall technician. Now, when he finally did retire in 1950, he was 87. And as 53 years of manager, this was his record. He won 3,731 games, a feat that will never be matched unless somebody starts their managing career at 20. He received the Bach Award for his service to Philadelphia in 1929, which was a recognition typically saved for artists and business professionals. In 1937, Mack was part of the second class elected into the National Baseball Hall of Fame.
Wow. High
heavy
credentials.
Stuff.
Yeah,
heavy
good stuff. This A's franchise has a wonderful history. And, we're going to talk about down the road, you and I are going to talk about their time in Kansas City as well, because although they had no winning seasons, just as the Braves had no losing seasons when they played in Milwaukee, the A's had no winning seasons when they played in Kansas City. Thank you, Al Blumkin, for that stat, by the way. And but they were an incredibly interesting team because, as you mentioned before, they were, in essence, a Yankee farm club.
They were.
And even when they became a major league team, because they were literally the Kansas City A's, the Kansas City minor league franchise before they became the Kansas City A's. So that's for another show down the road. Ian, I appreciate your time. You always educate me, and you put it so concisely and clearly, and I'm appreciative. Thank you, Ian.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Talk about any kind of baseball. That's how it is, man. Baseball, it's not a cult. Cult is only a small following. It's a religion. Remember, it does not discriminate. Women, Latinos, blacks, whites, Jews, whatever, Could be anything.
You can wear a hat. You don't have to wear a hat. It's a wonderful religion, and no one's coming back. We know that. So it makes being religious. We can only worship the pitching mound itself. People don't know that's where, right in the middle of it, the pitching mound and the rubber. Hey, thank you, Ian. We'll catch you next week.
Take care, Ralph.
All right. Be well, and for those of you out there, keep on keeping on. Be well. Bye.
Bye-bye now.